November 13th, 1962, Vienna. Robert Volkov sat at his usual table in Café Central, surrounded by the scent of fresh pastries and the soft murmur of patrons. He peered over his newspaper, scanning the crowded room with practiced nonchalance. His coffee had grown cold, but that was hardly his concern. For the past hour, he'd been watching the Soviet diplomat seated 3 tables away. At 42, Robert had spent nearly 15 years with the CIA, the last 5 stationed in Vienna. To the casual observer, he was simply another American cultural attaché, a position that provided excellent cover for his true work. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and checked his watch. The diplomat was late for his scheduled meeting, which raised Robert's suspicions. The aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis still reverberated through the intelligence community. Just 2 weeks earlier, the world had teetered on the brink of nuclear war. Now, with tensions marginally eased, both sides were scrambling to assess the new landscape. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Robert looked up to see a woman in her late 30s, her blonde hair arranged in a neat bob beneath a modest hat. Her accent was unmistakably Russian, though she spoke English with remarkable fluency. "Please," he replied, gesturing to the empty chair. "The café is quite busy today," she remarked, removing her gloves with deliberate care. "The strudel is worth the wait," Robert said, delivering the response that had been established for this contact. Her eyes met his briefly. "I prefer their Zahortorta, especially in November." The completion of their recognition phrase confirmed she was Katherina Egorov, the source he'd been instructed to meet. But something was wrong. His briefing indicated Katherina was a low-level clerk at the Soviet embassy, not the cultural attaché he recognized from diplomatic functions. "I believe we've met before," Robert said cautiously. "At the ambassador's reception last month." She smiled thinly. "I have one of those faces, easily confused with others." Robert maintained his composure, but his mind raced. Either his intelligence was wrong, or she wasn't who she claimed to be. He decided to proceed with caution. "Beautiful day for November," he commented. "Yes, though the forecast suggests a storm is coming." As they exchanged seemingly innocuous pleasantries, Robert noticed the Soviet diplomat he'd been watching earlier had disappeared. A coincidence? Perhaps. In his business, however, coincidences were treated as threats until proven otherwise. Katherina ordered coffee and leaned forward slightly. "I don't have much time. There's been a change. Petrov suspects there's a leak in the embassy." "Is your cover compromised?" "Not yet, but security has tightened. The usual channel won't work for the package." Robert nodded. The package contained photographs of Soviet diplomatic cables regarding their missile deployments in Cuba, information that could help American analysts understand exactly what concessions Khrushchev had extracted from Kennedy during their negotiations. "I need to move it soon," she continued. "Tonight, the Stat Park, by the Strauss statue, 8 o'clock. It was rushed, impromptu, everything a good operation shouldn't be. But if she was genuinely concerned about a security sweep, the risk might be justified." "I'll be there," he agreed, though his instincts screamed caution. She finished her coffee quickly. "Don't follow me out." After she left, Robert remained for another 20 minutes, scanning the room for surveillance. Nothing obvious, but the hairs on the back of his neck refused to settle. Something felt off. Back at the American embassy, Robert typed his contact report, carefully omitting certain details while he tried to sort through his concerns. He requested a background verification on Katherina Egorov through the secure channel to Langley, marking it urgent. His office was modest, intentionally so. As a mid-level diplomatic officer, anything more would draw attention. A framed photograph of a woman and young boy sat on his desk, his cover family back in Virginia. In reality, Robert had never married. The photograph was of his sister and nephew. The response from Langley came faster than expected. The brief cable confirmed Katherina Egorov was indeed a cultural attaché, not a clerk as his briefing had indicated. More concerning, there was no record of her being recruited or even approached as a potential asset. According to official records, she had been flagged as a suspected KGB officer. Robert stared at the cable, a cold knot forming in his stomach. He was being played. The question was, why? At 7:45 that evening, Robert arrived at Stat Park, taking a circuitous route and employing counter-surveillance measures. He carried a newspaper under his arm, inside it, an envelope with seemingly innocuous tourist photographs but containing microfilm with disinformation his superiors had quickly prepared. The park was mostly empty, with only a few couples strolling along the lamplit paths. Robert positioned himself near the Johann Strauss statue, maintaining a clear view of the approaches. The evening air was crisp, carrying the promise of snow. At precisely 8 o'clock, Katherina appeared, walking purposefully along the main path. Robert observed her for a moment before stepping forward. Her eyes darted around continuously, the behavior of someone worried about surveillance, or someone checking that a trap was set properly. "Good evening," he said as she approached. "You shouldn't have come," she replied immediately, her voice tense. "They know." Robert felt adrenaline surge. "Who knows what exactly?" "KGB. They know about our meeting. They're watching now." She glanced over her shoulder. "We have only minutes. Then we should leave separately," Robert suggested, testing her. "No." Her response came too quickly. "I need to give you something first." Robert's suspicion crystallized. If she truly believed they were under KGB surveillance, she wouldn't attempt to pass materials. It would mean certain imprisonment for her, possibly execution. "I think we should abort," he said calmly. "Please," she insisted, reaching into her coat. "This information, it's about a new Soviet operation, codenamed Sparrow." Robert took a step back. "There's no operation by that name." For a brief moment, her composure slipped. She recovered quickly, but not before Robert caught the flash of calculation in her eyes. "Of course there is," she insisted. "It's highly classified. Katherina, or whatever your real name is, we both know what's happening here." Two men in dark coats entered the park from opposite directions, moving with the unmistakable purpose of intelligence officers closing in. Robert had expected KGB, but these men's gaits and positioning suggested they were neither KGB nor American. Possibly Austrian state security. "You're trapped, Robert," Katherina said, dropping all pretense. "The Americans won't help you. Not after they see what you've been passing to us." Understanding dawned. A false flag operation. You were never a source. This entire scenario. You're setting me up as a Soviet agent. She smiled coldly. "You Americans think you have a monopoly on such tactics. The photographs in your pocket. They'll show you meeting with a known KGB officer. The microfilm they'll find in your apartment contains American nuclear deployment information. And your coded message to Moscow will be intercepted tonight." The approaching men were 30 yards away now, walking faster. "Why me?" Robert asked, playing for time while calculating his options. "Because you recognized someone you shouldn't have last month. A highly placed asset of ours within your government. We couldn't risk you making the connection." Robert thought back frantically, replaying diplomatic functions in his mind. Then it hit him, the Assistant Secretary of State's visit. The way he had spoken at length with a Soviet cultural officer, the familiar manner between them. "Porter," Robert said. "James Porter is your asset." Katherina's expression confirmed it. "Very good. Too bad you won't be able to tell anyone." The men were closing in. Robert knew that if they took him, he'd be facing a stark choice. Confess to being a Soviet spy, ruining his career and potentially facing prison, or resist and have fabricated evidence presented against him anyway. There's a third option, Katherina said, as if reading his thoughts. Defect. Come work for us genuinely. We protect our people better than the Americans do. Like you protected the asset I supposedly recognized? Her expression hardened. That was unfortunate but necessary. The men were 15 yards away now. Robert made his decision. He lunged forward, grabbing Katherina's arm and spinning her toward him. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Ensuring we both have a lot to explain," he replied, then loudly declared in German, "Austrian security. This woman is KGB." The approaching men hesitated, confusion evident. In that moment of uncertainty, Robert released Katherina and sprinted toward the park's western exit. Shouts erupted behind him. He heard Katherina yelling in Russian, then German. The men gave chase, but Robert knew Vienna streets better than most locals. He cut through an alley, scaled a low wall, and emerged onto a busy street where he immediately blended with evening theatergoers. 3 hours later, Robert sat in a safe house across the city, facing his station chief, Gregory Newman. "You're certain about Porter?" Newman asked, his face grave. Katherina confirmed it. "They staged this entire operation to discredit me before I could report my suspicions." "Which you never did," Newman pointed out, "because I wasn't certain until tonight. I only had a feeling something was off about their interaction." Newman sighed heavily. "This is a mess, Robert. The Austrians picked up the woman. She's claiming diplomatic immunity, of course, but also insisting you approached her as a potential defector. Standard KGB playbook. Yes, but it's your word against hers. And with Porter's position," Newman trailed off. "He has access to sensitive nuclear planning after Cuba," Robert finished. "If he's been compromised, we need to act immediately. Washington won't move against an assistant secretary without ironclad proof. Your encounter in the park isn't enough." Robert leaned forward. "Then let me get proof." "How?" "Your cover in Vienna is blown. The Soviets know you made the connection to Porter." "Not completely blown," Robert countered. "The Austrians never saw my face clearly. Katherina is the only one who can identify me with certainty." "What are you suggesting?" "I need to meet with her." "Alone?" Newman laughed without humor. "And how do you propose to arrange that? Walk into the Soviet embassy and ask nicely?" "No," Robert said thoughtfully, "but there might be a way." 2 days later, Katherina Egorov received a note at her embassy office. It contained a single line. "The Zahertorta really is better in November. Hotel Sacher, 3 p.m. Despite every professional instinct warning against it, she found herself in the hotel's famous café that afternoon. Her superiors had been furious about the failed operation, particularly after the Americans had quietly moved Porter to a less sensitive position, citing health concerns. Though nothing had been proven, the damage was done. She spotted him immediately, sitting at a corner table, calmly drinking coffee. Foolish man, she thought. 2 KGB officers were positioned nearby, ready to intervene if necessary. "You're either very brave or very stupid," she said, sitting down across from him. "I've been called worse," Robert replied. "Coffee? Why am I here, Mr. Volkov? Because you're curious. And because, like me, you recognize we're both simply doing our jobs." She studied him carefully. "If this is an attempt to recruit me, you're wasting your time." "Not at all. I simply wanted to meet the woman who nearly ended my career." Professional courtesy. A waiter approached. Katherina ordered coffee, if only to extend the conversation and understand his angle. "Your operation was impressive," Robert continued after the waiter left. "The timing, the backstory, the trapped exit. If I hadn't been suspicious from the start, It would have worked perfectly. You flatter me to what end? No flattery, just facts. We're professionals in the same business, on opposite sides of an ideological divide neither of us created. And yet we perpetuate it, she noted. We do. Robert glanced around the café. Difficult not to notice your colleagues by the door and near the window. Vienna station must think highly of you to commit resources to protection. Or they don't trust you. A bit of both, I imagine. He smiled slightly. Just as your Mr. Petrov doesn't entirely trust you after our little encounter in the park. Her coffee arrived. She took a sip, buying time to assess his angle. What do you want, Robert? Surely not just conversation. Actually, that's precisely what I want. He leaned forward. The world nearly ended 2 weeks ago. Men like Kennedy and Khrushchev brought us to the brink, then pulled back. But the machinery of our profession grinds on, doesn't it? The same dead drops, the same recruitment attempts, the same elaborate deceptions. You're becoming philosophical. It doesn't suit an operative. Perhaps not. But it suits a human being who just witnessed how fragile our entire civilization really is. Katherina studied him with genuine curiosity now. Are you defecting after all? No. I'm suggesting something else. He placed a small envelope on the table. These are the names of 2 Soviet agents we're watching in Vienna. Low level, not particularly valuable. Why would you give me this? Because in exchange, I want you to warn me if your people attempt another operation against me personally. Not details, just a warning. She laughed softly. That's absurd. Why would I agree to that? Because the alternative is I submit a full report identifying James Porter, with details only he would know about Soviet missile deployments in Cuba, details he passed to your government. His career would be finished, and a valuable asset of yours compromised. You're bluffing. You don't have such information. Perhaps. Are you willing to take that chance? Katherina fell silent, considering. The offer was unorthodox but not unprecedented. Small trades happened occasionally between intelligence officers, a professional courtesy that sometimes prevented larger disasters. What you're suggesting borders on treason, she finally said. Not at all. I'm protecting myself while offering you something of value. The names I've given you are already known to your counterintelligence division. I'm simply accelerating their discovery. She pocketed the envelope without examining it. I'll consider your proposal. That's all I ask. Robert stood, leaving money for the coffee. Until our paths cross again, Ms. Egorov. They will, she promised, neither threat nor assurance in her voice. As Robert walked out of the hotel, he knew his career in Vienna was effectively over. Within a week, he would be recalled to Langley, ostensibly for consultation but really for reassignment. The Porter situation would be handled quietly, the assistant secretary retiring early for health reasons. The potential compromise never officially acknowledged. What Robert couldn't anticipate was that his unusual proposal to Katherina would mark the beginning of something neither of them intended. Over the next 27 years, through postings in Berlin, Prague, London, and finally Moscow, they would maintain their strange arrangement. Small warnings passed through cutouts and dead drops. Occasional meetings in neutral locations, always under the guise of attempted recruitment. These encounters never compromised either side's operations in any meaningful way. Rather, they formed a private channel of communication between 2 professionals who, despite their loyalties, shared a common understanding of their peculiar world. In January 1989, as the Cold War was visibly crumbling, Robert sat in a café in Budapest, waiting. He was 69 now, long past field operations, serving as a senior advisor to the American ambassador. His hair had turned white, his face lined with age, but his eyes remained sharp. Katherina arrived precisely on time, as she always did. At 65, she carried herself with the same dignity she had in Vienna decades earlier. She had risen to become a senior KGB officer before taking a diplomatic post that everyone recognized as a pre-retirement sinecure. "You're looking well, Robert," she said, sitting down across from him. "As are you, Katherina, though I think we're both feeling our age." She smiled. "Speak for yourself, American." They ordered coffee, maintaining their decades-old ritual. "Your wall is coming down," Robert observed. "Gorbachev isn't going to stop the reforms. Things change. Systems evolve or die. And what happens to people like us when the game ends?" Katherina considered this. "We become relics, I suppose, museum pieces from a different era." Somewhat depressing thought. "Is it?" She looked at him thoughtfully. "For nearly 30 years we've been adversaries, Robert. And yet, I probably know you better than anyone in your own organization. You understand me better than my colleagues ever did." "The irony isn't lost on me," he admitted. "Our countries spent billions trying to destroy each other, and here we sit having coffee. We were never truly enemies," Katherina said. "Simply players assigned to opposite sides of the board." Robert nodded. "I'm retiring next month. Going back to Virginia. There's a fishing stream I've been promising myself for decades." "I'm not far behind you. A dacha outside Moscow awaits me." They fell silent, the weight of 3 decades hanging between them. "I've often wondered," Robert finally said, "that day in Vienna, would you really have gone through with it? Destroyed my career, possibly sent me to prison." Katherina smiled enigmatically. "Would you have exposed Porter if I hadn't agreed to your arrangement? I suppose we'll never know." She raised her coffee cup. "To unanswered questions. And unlikely connections," he added, touching his cup to hers. They finished their coffee in companionable silence. When it was time to leave, they stood and faced each other, neither quite knowing how to end a relationship that had existed in shadows for so long. "Write to me sometime," Katherina finally said. "No codes, no dead drops. Just a letter from an old American fisherman to a retired Russian gardener." "I'd like that," Robert replied, "though our respective agencies might find it suspicious." "Let them wonder." She extended her hand. "Goodbye, Robert Volkov." He took it firmly. "Goodbye, Katherina Egorov." They parted ways on that cold Budapest street, 2 veterans of a secret war that was fading into history. Their loyalty to their countries had never wavered, their professional obligations never compromised. Yet somehow, across decades of global conflict and personal danger, they had forged something neither could have anticipated that day in Vienna, a connection that transcended the arbitrary boundaries of nation and ideology. 2 years later, as the Soviet Union itself dissolved, Robert received a postcard from Moscow. It contained no message, only a picture of a garden in bloom and a signature, K. He smiled, placed it in a drawer with his most treasured possessions, and sat down to write a letter about the fishing in Virginia.